Hello, my beauties. August is over. What did I watch? What should you watch? Let's find out. Multiple Maniacs. John Waters' 1970 film? What a way to start out the month. Really, this is like my third time watching Multiple Maniacs, but this time I got to see it in a theater setting, where it shined even more. This is like the earliest John Waters film to where you can identify the John Waters film, I'll say. It's a celluloid atrocity, it's trash, it's high trash, and you can find the first two acts of this movie to be that sloppier John Waters finding himself, sort of stumbling on the way a bit, being a bit unpolished. But something about getting to see it, like, in the setting it was meant to be, with fans of it, it all really shines with this newest restoration for the Criterion. For something that should be so amateur and, like, cheap, it looks amazing with the high contrast black and white. The art house boy behind this vomitorium really comes out of his shell. Like the guy who has posters of Teorema and such all over the walls of his apartment, which are the sets in this film. So Multiple Maniacs, it is everything that a carnivalesque gross-out show and middle finger to the straight world should be. But from the opening scene, which is David Lochary carnival barking at the audience to come see all things grotesque and immoral, we're set. This is a film going fuck you to normalcy and prejudice in America. From queer freaks who are told socially and from the law that they're repulsive for who they are, one of the natural responses that builds up inside is, well, if I'm going to be treated as some disgusting monster even when I come from a middle American home and conform to normalcy in every way but being gay, then why conform at all? I'll be the biggest, most disgusting monster I can because at least I will have fun. The film is just a constant collection of bits projecting everything straight-laced America despises in a plot populated fully of people that America despises. And when we finally reach that final crescendo, I mean, this is literally one of my favorite, endings to a film of all time, and it is by far what elevates this to being worth watching, in line with Pink Flamingos and Forward. The film literally falls apart. It explodes to bits from its excess, and we marvel at the black flame that burns so bright. I mean, our introduction to Divine perfectly exemplifies this. At first, he's just this big blob of white space, and then from this white whale emerges the face of utmost glamour, Divine. I love the orgasmic energy of a John Waters script, let's say. It's designed, to be a constant stream of orgasm from its prominent characters. Even the cinematography, which objectively looks like Waters not knowing how to hold a camera, and shifting the zoom and the focus in real time, to takes with plenty of improvisation, complements it so perfectly. It too feeling orgasmic, like pornographic auga-ogling, which is this whole movie's thing. Even some of the more drawn-out parts, like the Stations of the Cross, felt way shorter on this viewing, which they certainly need to. But every single time we get to that last act, it just erases all of the faults of what came before. I literally forget that I wasn't thinking the movie was that great by the time it's over. Because everything from that last freak out is just one of my favorite kinds of things you can do in film. Where it just feels like the walls have fallen over. Like this is where Divine is born. You can see it, and it's fucking magical. Like the very last strings to being a human are severed, and everything that happens after is just madness and depravity on a superhuman scale. It is divine. Yes, there's lines that you will notice keep getting repeated because they're clearly ad-libbing. Some shots are genuinely bad. And when you're watching it in a crowd, you just get the laughs at every big, memorable line. People just walking around John Waters' backyard, acting like this is outside. I had this pretty squarely in the lesser of Waters' early provocation pieces. So even I was a bit surprised when I found its punk ethos fully formed. The dirtiness and roughness of it just add as much as they take for these unique specimens of trash. A spirited, stupid, and trashy classic. The Shivering Truth, a television show that aired on Adult Swim I don't know what made me decide now is the time I pick out another Adult Swim show with cult praise to catch up on. I didn't even go in knowing it's made by the guy from Xavier Renegade Angel, another whacked out series that I kinda dig. I just knew that logo always looked enticing, and that I wanted something maybe spooky. The Shivering Truth is scary stories to tell in the dark for 20-somethings. Now, I was a Goosebumps kid myself, but what this show is doing fills that void and more. The outer trappings of the show present each episode as a Twilight Zone-esque zoom-in media res to a world that's off and upsetting. It recaptures that vibe that in retrospect is only fully alive in youth, around the campfire or up past bedtime watching Tales from the Crypt or any of those other horror anthologies mentioned and to be mentioned. And yet within that spirit, conjured so convincingly are stories well beyond just horror. It is an absolutely absurd and ridiculous dark comedy. A comedy of fears, but not simple ones. Existential fears, philosophical dead ends, social anxieties, and internal shames that make up the horrors of adulthood. Did you hear that? There's a fucking fly in here. Driving me crazy. That's kind of what watching The Shivering Truth feels like. All accelerated through dream logic, made all the more nauseating by the 11-minute sprint of the Adult Swim time slot. I mean, the setup and the level of, unseriousness that you would expect are one thing, but I think this is like a genuine masterpiece and a work of art that should be preserved. The cinematography, if you stop and admire it, contains powerful images with that Lynchian resonance you can't quite name, but you know it means something to you. It feels so stupid and fast-paced you wouldn't expect this level of direction that's put into it. The shot compositions, the perspective tricks used, the lighting, the colorful stop-motion animation. This shit looks genuinely very expensive and time-consuming. The soundtrack, I went back and listened to some of that in isolation for this, and it's also really well done. And all the creepy little sounds, offbeat, should be comedic, but also just mixed with terror, works amazingly. I mean, this is the kind of fully uninhibited expression that I feel like few can achieve. It's hard to truly peel everything back, expose all of yourself down to the other side, but this one makes it. These stories are at once highly impossible, but harshly true to real life. The fears are there, lurking in the daytime, only allowed to come out in our dreams and nightmares. Also, Chapman's knack for narration stands out from the crowd. He crafts the most ingeniously stupid phrases from incomplete pieces of thoughts, but that structure is also what the entirety of the Shivering Truth's episodic stories are. It's what happens when all the lines disappear and everything contained within fucking implodes and clumps together into a viscerous mass. You know, there's certain uses of the dry, drawn-out humor, where you just realize, the entire episode is going to be this one awkwardly extended bit. Didn't work as much for me, but by the end of every episode, it presents me with something I would not throw away. And I can rewatch these things, and this does need to be discovered by more people. We need to bring that campfire stories in the dark out again. Come on. I finally saw The Beast, Bertrand Bonello's latest film, and this comes out of the gate as a modern, multifaceted piece exploring themes of AI, acting, technology, love, personhood, all swarming together as Bertrand loves to do with his triptychal structures. Because Léa Seydoux is starring as a woman over 3 different time periods, maybe 4, as these sort of love stories occur again and again. The thing is, AI is telling humanity that the trauma of our past lives is stopping us from, evolving into the perfectly balanced and unemotional AI that we are meant to be. So let's start off with Léa Seydoux because, that's going to be a big draw for this. And this role really gets to let her be triple the star. She's one of my favorite actors working today, and this role really shows off everything that makes her special. She blends so well into any time period, and can take any emotion, extreme or subdued, needed of her. She can do this heightened, starlit quality. Nicole Kidman has it too, which lends itself great to thrillers, adding a sense of dread that's lurking somewhere in the story. And what this long, convoluted story is getting at really justifies its convoluted nature as it goes on. The Beast explores this great dread. It could be existential, it could be the dread of any era, the way that we see an oncoming doom across generations. You know, old classical France, where the romance is sort of this extramarital connection. And so you have the trappings of what's proper and what's taboo in this time in society, but an age that feels much more romantic, much more personal than the two later ones we're going to go to. Because what Bonello loves to do is have these parallels and reflections to his narratives. He's really crafted his own way of approaching like a Lynchian surrealist storytelling, even if it heavily references those sources. You know, information that's introduced isn't to be discarded, it sort of overlays. So, obviously, in the 19th century, we have dolls, which evolve into AI, human, android, people dolls of the future. The thing that all of this weaving in and out of all these times and worlds is coming to say that maybe humanity really does not change. We're coded with all of these issues that make us human, that even with all the trappings and the different ways we register the rules and what we can and can't do, and the strange feelings that come up from us, we're really just doing the same thing, and we'll continue to do the same thing even as we're thinking we're evolving and growing out of our faults of the past and where we come from as flawed animals. And the eerie thing is that we are coded to destroy ourselves. The growth of AI, our passions, our Frankensteins. So the question that Léa Seydoux' character asks throughout all of her iterations is what this sense of doom hanging over her is, that she would only share in a very, intimate way with anybody. The second time period of the movie is essentially modern day. It's 2015, so the internetisms are a little bit, older than now, but yeah, this is a really damning indictment of the period. Technology creating these hyper-isolated, lonely people with lacking connections and interactions. Obviously feeling relevant to today. There's a lot of imagery and ideas that are coming from the pandemic and how that would only exacerbate this period between the 2015 era and the slight, maybe, future of AI dominance. But yeah, here we get an incel. So he's gonna go kill Léa Seydoux because he sees her. There's some really interesting thriller dynamics in this section, but also the growing amount of walls between people, the screening of our lives, and how in this segment Léa Seydoux' character, I think, is fighting back against the programming. You can see the glitching of the story happening to her and around her. It's a very, very interesting, and I'll say compelling film. It's another Bertrand Bonello film, which I've seen 3 of them one time each, and the thing I've got to say is that these are films that you don't watch once and be done with. They beckon you to rewatch them at least once. But yeah, this one just gives you a ton to think about. This is not a film that I can talk about. That would just go on for like an hour. Definitely watch this if you want to see something unique, well made, and that you can chew on afterwards for a long while. Next I saw Pecker, a more recent John Waters film. So not only did rewatching multiple Maniacs spark my need to give in and watch more John Waters movies, I've also been going and listening to his interviews and stuff, and really anytime he's speaking into a microphone. He's such a great personality and full of wit. He's just got a natural comedic sense to him. He was talking up Pecker a bit, so I watched this kind of because it was so low on my Waters priorities. Serial Mom and Desperate Living are like the essentials I still haven't watched, but I've got to get my friends together, watch it in a group, because we love his weird shit, and we watch that together. But Pecker, it's sort of a... Pecker takes a lot of cliche, story beats. It's that lower class and high class, 2 camps fighting. In this case, Baltimore versus the New York City high art scene. And I'm just gonna come right out and say that the conflict has that autopilot set of cliches that I find representative of neither class truly understanding the other. So when the finale is here telling us that all has been resolved as the two classes all get along and New York comes to embrace the wild side of Baltimore, it's wince-inducing precisely because that is the opposite of what it feels like. It's very patronizing to both sides. Although with Hollywood being the comptroller, I feel it's even more patronizing to the lower class Americans here. The thing is, at the start, we get all the Charm City, Baltimore scenery, and it hits that note. You know, John Waters knows this. He loves diving into this aesthetic. The sets are beautiful, it feels so Baltimore. And Pecker, with his performance, also rides this line, where you're not sure if underneath the bubbly love of all the ugliness there isn't some equal amount of disgust. Now, if the plot moved forward with this internal dichotomy, if it were brought out of Pecker, that would be interesting and let Waters really explore his place in both worlds. But when Pecker never changes, it feels like a contempt that's never addressed and moreover dominates the vibe given off. I really didn't know what the fuck the main actor was doing. Like, yeah, at the start we get it, the weird kid energy, he's sort of wiry and detached, but throughout this entire series of plot beats and quote-unquote narrative progression, he doesn't change at all. Like, at all. Part of what makes any emotional beat fall flat is his non-interaction with them. By the end, I actually fucking hated this kid. The happy-go-lucky is adhered to like a rictus that makes him come off as an asshole. But anyway, back to Baltimore. This is clearly the best part of the film, John Waters' aesthetic authorship. The sets and locations around Baltimore are so right, so realistically chinced up and scuzzy tacky, but with a sparkly charm to it. The whole conceit of the movie really is Waters' focus on street photography and the windows they give into that perfect off-the-road Americana that can be captured with the right eye. I mean, Cindy Sherman shows up at one point and I'm like, yeah, that's who I'd expect if I had to guess. The film's a weird kind of beast to judge, knowing these photographs were fabricated for a movie, made to decorate these photographs. I mean, I believe the exhibit Pecker puts on would be swept up by the art crowd because the pictures really are powerful showcases of John Waters' vision in photography form. They're almost too good to be true, but then they kind of are because Waters invented them with the movie. That's what sort of gives me the most meat to chew on, because it's not very funny. I'm sorry. Every emotional beat is so full of holes, nothing lands, and it becomes more and more tedious as it goes on. The hits against either side of the state line are weak. It drops the shock or insightfulness of John Waters' best material. There are some good performances here, like Pecker's sister, who works at the gay strip club, and the lady who plays the New York art promoter who discovers Pecker. But everyone else, even if interesting in their own right, like, best case, his girlfriend, just comes to feel flatter and flatter as it goes on, because there's nothing really for them to do but be the cliche roles. It's like something out of Freddy Got Fingered, but you can't tell if it's the joke. Yeah, this one was a bit of a flop from John Waters, but hey. I've heard that the later you go on, besides some high marks, it kind of gets shaky. I think he's on record saying he got paid for this more than Pink Flamingos or any other thing he's famous for, so get that bag, good sir. I watched Anna and the Wolves, a 1973 film from Carlos Saura. He's a director who falls very much in line with the Francoist, Spain, satire surrealist movement. So expect something very dry on the surface that gets more and more wacky and perverse within that suited up authoritarian sheen. I watched this because it was my random movie shuffle. And I did see one of his other films, Peppermint Frappe, which I liked, and I liked this one too, maybe even a little bit more. So Anna, a British woman, comes to babysit 3 girls at an isolated Madrid estate, but in reality comes to play the babysitter more to 3 men, brothers who represent the main arms of fascism. Everything is set at this house, this estate that's crumbling in isolation and stagnation. You can really feel the rotting to the core of its once regal inhabitants. But unlike Texas Chainsaw Massacre, the furnishing's all still intact. The mask is up, kinda. Our heroine dares to enter the wolf's den and shake things up. It's an allegorical taking down of very authoritarian, upright men and their torn up, repressed psyches, with a beautiful, free spirit of a woman straight out of the miniskirt revolution, consciously performing the fantasy pixie girl role that's at the heart of all these men who probably, under all their dogma, really just want to have sex with a woman. But yeah, this film feels very sick and ominous. You're being exposed to their desires, to which they've been conditioned to revile, and the alchemy from that can be dangerous as their sicknesses approach healing. You know, even Anna, who is our sort of surrogate, quickly becomes a strange character herself. The way she embraces a lot of their advances and psychoses, and you're not quite sure what game she's playing. Because she's sort of actually challenging them, but is she doing it to like heal them, therapeutically confronting them with their fears and their own contradictions, or is she just sort of playing with them? The tone of the film is bizarre. It has that older European film quality where they just shoot on location, and it's lacking that immersive artifice and trimming so that you feel like you're just there. People can just be idling around, walking around, and you just get a feel for this real location, the wind in the air. Add into that, you know, the creepy, fetishistic, ominous inner workings bubbling up, and you get a tense, stuffy environment of a thriller, and you never know where things are going. This leads to an ending that is, when the credits come up, I was just like, what am I supposed to feel? Like I said, it's hard to read the characters. There's no internal monologue that defines what is going on, really. There's parts of this film that take on the feeling of a heartwarming, drifting helper who comes in, confronts this broken family with all of their problems, and will leave having fixed everything. But there's another part where you feel like the wolves are coming, like something horrible is going to happen. Like this is all a sham that's going to break down at any point into total debauched violence. I mean, it can be fucking frightening. Next, I watched Blow Up, Antonioni's 1966 film for the first time. So yeah, this is like, you know, one of your Sight and Sound top 100 films of all time, your favorite director's favorite movie type film, and I got like a, you know, I liked it, but I just felt like I was missing so much of what would make it one of the greatest movies of all time. Also, I swear to God, I thought the main character was played by Terrence Stamp the entire way through. I'm sorry to the actor David Hemmings. I'm sorry, I was just thinking of Terrence Stamp throughout the whole movie instead of you. So what I'm talking about, the characters kept making decisions that just made no sense to me, and there are more secondary characters who also just sort of vanish, introduce elements that you'd think would lead to something and then don't. You know, as a collection of scenes wrapped around the conceit of a murder plot, I just found such a dawdling, dwindling feeling to a lot of the in-betweens. I thought a lot of the scenes were awkwardly constructed in a way that kept me just sort of phasing out of attention with the movie. And I came in knowing that maybe the murder plot wasn't, you know, actually the thing that you're supposed to be paying attention to. I know that it might be dissecting that, especially, you know, when we're an hour in and it hasn't even happened yet. I get that. But I was still, something about the film still made me impatient with it. Like I wanted somebody to pay attention, to get to the, you know, the plot, like the point, or what our character's doing with any focus. But as the weeks have gone on, like these exact criticisms I'm saying, I'm coming to understand how that's what the movie is, and that if I rewatch this, I might really love it significantly more. It implies it's intentional, like you had a murder cleaned up under your nose. And if you went back and paused and saw what's going on behind all of the distractions, you could piece together how things happened the way they did. Like a lot of these women characters like Jane Birkins or Vanessa Redgraves have this femme fatale doubt instilled into them in their relationships with the photographer. But, you know, then there's a character like his wife, who kind of appears for 1 second, and then again at the very end of the movie once again, so it's kind of confusing what she even meant or did. And I do not believe that the dead guy in the park is just laying there, hanging out in the open all day. For our protagonist to run around and do all of this stuff and then go back and find him there again in the same spot. But the way the scene was filmed and presented, I also got a feeling that it existed as both being plausibly in reality or a fantasy or like a dream sequence that's just never announced as one. I do love what the film is doing with the fracturing of the lens, the cameras, exploring filmmaking and voyeurism all in a subtly perverse way. It's very timeless in how it's connecting an imagetic worldview to social inertia, short-term attention, and isolation. The lifeless crowd at the rock concert was a great image, and it felt like a critique that would be thrown out today towards Gen Z and their concert etiquette. You know, I really loved the choice of that ending. The ending, it really brings the focus back from what we were influenced to focus on to what the director is really talking about, and it drives home that you should have been paying attention to much larger themes. It's a captivating look at youth culture, modernization, mortality, or perhaps impermanence, and loneliness. Even like a material versus reality conflict in this world where things might be ephemeral, where reality doesn't exist in any of these frames of film, in these objectivizations of what's happening in real time, existing in frames of time, and then not. I'm going to talk about this one cover that was issued for The Stranger, like Albert Camus, because for my money it's the worst cover for a book that I have ever known. And now I'm feeling like the person who made that decision watched Blow Up and was making a connection there. It doesn't work, like, at all, because you're supposed to be drawn to the book from the cover, not a whole different movie. But anyway, because of this, I came to see the literary absurdist piece that Blow Up really is the more I've thought of it. You know, the setup to make a statement through a scene on some aspect of its themes was a little bit clunky, I think. I didn't get every frame being suffused with thematic ideas. Maybe next time. Then I returned to the world of anime with Dungeon Meshi, the latest big boy from Studio Trigger, based on the manga by Ryoko Kui. I'll say my anime side has shrunken to a sort of like vestigial organ of my media consumption these days, but I still love it. Oddly, if I were to take what select anime I've loved in recent years, I've noticed like half of it involves accessible, family-friendly series that are just being made at such a high standard of quality. I have no shame putting them up there with my experimental, mature anime faves. I mean, I adored Mob Psycho 100, Kaguya-sama Love is War, Spy Family, and now Dungeon Meshi. It's a cooking/fantasy anime about a bunch of dungeon explorers plumbing the depths for ostensibly, to rescue somebody and maybe do the main quest, but maybe it's more about the meals they make on the way down. I'm saying they eat monsters. I really love the protagonist, Leos. He could have been a generic, socially awkward shonen protag, but there's way more to it than that. The fandom is readily taking him in as a representation of neurodivergence, I'll say. I put him under the classification of a Cronenberg protagonist. Yeah, I'm serious. In a way you wouldn't predict from a series that goes for like a mainstream shonen appeal. Leos is like the sweet culinary direction you could take that archetype. I love that his genuine adoration of monster anatomy and flavor sustains him, and how that is shown as something that will weird out, normal people. It overlaps quite a bit with, some of my obsessions and medical fascinations. And boy, does this show go into elaborate scientific detail to flesh out its fantasy world. Everything is thought out to justify its setting, reinforcing magical tropes with scientific logic, and it is very intelligently designed if you dig into it. I think the reason the show has caught on with so many people is the all-encompassing nature of it. It didn't have to go to such lengths to build its fantasy setting. A vast amount of anime out there doesn't. But in doing so, it has the many pockets of a world that ours does, and it brings all these various communities together into an equally diverse fandom. It's an anime that might actually make people more social if they engage with it. And every member of this lovable main cast are a treat to watch as they go through their Monster of the Week turned Meal of the Week adventures. And there's a growing cast of characters from all the other races and factions who all carry unique personalities and worldviews too. It's as nerdy in its commitment to making sense of a fantasy ecosystem, social and historical hierarchy as Togashi with Hunter x Hunter. And okay, it hasn't gotten to grow to that showcase of monumental sophistication yet with only 24 episodes, but from the layer of hints and breadcrumbs, going into all these mysteries, it has all the implications that it intends to. If anything, I say come for the classic anime food porn and hilarious comedy. Senshi is king and Leos is god. Dungeon Meshi. Then I watched The Legend of Hell House. Ooh. 1973. Man, I fucked up watching this before October. This shoots straight up to the top of my list of the most Halloween-y movies I have ever seen. I mean, right from the very first shot of the movie, it just goes straight in. Creepy angles, creepy wide shots, the two people just talking to each other in a library. And that title drop, there's no filler, no fuss. Things are just creepy. They enter the house, and you'd be asking, well, are we gonna find out if the house is really haunted? Yes it is. But oh my god, this house. The set design throughout this location is masterful. Walking around the place just feels ominous. You can feel something watching all of its inhabitants. And the corners all fall into black darkness. No one ever ventures to explore all of these last nooks and secret areas, so we're left feeling lost and overpowered by its interiors. The colors and patterns and textures all over the walls, the doors and statues are grotesque, gilded, haunted mansion goodness. And the cinematography is perfectly calibrated for this line of Halloween, hammer horror, oversaturated lighting, while also at the same time capturing this unsettling realism. Also, the underlying psychology behind the haunting and how it manifests the darker aspects of each character also fits it into the gothic ghost story canon. Like I said, the tone is on one hand campy and amplified, sometimes theatrical, but on the other, the evil, sinful histories and actions, and the gritty, nasty, violent at the core of it is just the level preceding Grindhouse. But it does an exceptional job tricking you into feeling like it's far from it. Also aiding the movie are 4 fantastic performances from all the 4 investigators, who each offer different archetypes of a human entering the haunted house genre. They all sort of go off and address the mystery of the haunting their own way. Now, Pamela Franklin, who plays the mental medium, was the standout performer, even of the bunch. I'm talking bona fide 70s Scream Queen material. And then looking her up, I discovered she was the girl in The Innocents, which is a movie that you would definitely connect to this one through the film canon. And I've mentioned in a review for that before that she and the boy were really special child performances. I'm let down that she didn't have a greater filmography. I will say the ending, meaning from the conclusive showdown on, rose things to an extra level of goofy that kind of brings it down a peg. I mean, there's a level of camp to this movie in its entirety. I won't score it down, but I don't know if anybody's gonna guess how they choose to fight the big bad at the end. I so badly want to talk about this, but I can't spoil the ending to this movie, because I highly recommend it. I watched this in the dark, alone in my apartment with the occasional bumps coming from my neighbors. It was a beautiful viewing experience. Next up is Party Girl, a Daisy von Schurler-Meyer film from '95. So in case you haven't noticed, I don't have any kind of theme or direction to what I have to watch this month, so I just gave myself a random prompt for the day to watch a movie that's Brat. Because I don't know, that's a thing people do. And let me tell you, I fucking nailed it. The film is such a specific snapshot of a time and place in New York. I feel like I'm learning about a foreign culture, even though I'm American. I was kind of surprised this wasn't a Whit Stillman film. Yes, that's me talking like I'm an expert of Stillman, having seen one film, The Last Days of Disco. But I mean, if you've seen that, and maybe The Day Trippers, I think they share that lived-in New York lens. If you're going into this movie from the poster, Parker Posey, and the advertising, you're gonna get your expectations subverted. This is not really your screwball comedy. This is much more a close character study and a portrait of the New York circuit and the young 20s lifestyle. Well, let's talk about Parker Posey, because it is about time I watched a vehicle for her, since I've been running into her a lot in films, and she definitely has that presence that you remember. But watching Party Girl, I was made aware of just how much that persona plays into an archetype. because her role here is much more nuanced. It's a fleshed out character who still has to find herself, and you can see all of these ideas of a kind of person fighting and falling out and making up over the course of the story. But there's a mood to it, you know? Party girl, thinking about the future. A lot of this is just a series of almost standalone bits set up to deliver these hyper-specific, witty payoffs, but with like one or two hooks to another plot line, as all the differing characters have one thread of connection to another through the grapevine. But mama, when we get to the party, everything suddenly paid off big, and the sides to our party girl crashed down. It was glorious. I was really feeling the film elevate itself beyond being glibly witty. The messiness, the fleeting glamour turning to sleaze in mere seconds of the club night's circadian rhythm. And there's something about the New Yorkness of being peripheral to sophistication and having all of these ambitious experiences, but also being put down as shamefully stupid. Like all of your growth and metropolitanism is just putting on makeup for the scale of fitting into the whole wide world, and it's gonna be running by midnight. There's a lower budgetness to it. Some of the parties in this feel like barely strung together with its extras. It's campy and it focuses on the it crowd that you would notice at maybe, fully populated parties. But in the grand scheme of it all, being there and shining for a small, sweaty group all here for the moment and heading elsewhere does come to feel senseless. Parker's character is also looking for a way out to escape the destructiveness of hinging on the rush. But it celebrates this too, and discovering yourself in a diverse environment. So is Party Girl Brat? Turns out Party Girl was broadcast over the internet. It premiered online in 1995. That is so 1999. I wish I was more articulate, let's say, about fashion, because I haven't even mentioned the wardrobe for this movie. Mary, this girl, is dressed. She just shows up in all of these elaborately put together outfits that are so party girl. She walks out to the streets in the daytime with these outfits, and it almost makes it feel like, to her, the work in the daytime is the moonlighting to the real life of the night parties. But no, this was great. It's humorous. I think it very authentically explores party girlism and all the facets that is to a real person. So I'm just gonna give myself a 10 out of 10 for following the prompt, and an 8 out of 10 to the movie.